Isabella, spin it up one time. Man, Mario Bava was certainly an odd one, wasn't he? He loved to film beautiful Italian women, he loved to film them in peril, and he also loved a lot of really sweeping shots and some gorgeous cinematography and blood that was always a little bit tiny, absolutely too red. Does that grammatically make sense? Not really. I'm John Renton with the retro view of Blood and Black Lace from 1964, or 63, or 65, depending on when you saw this and what the release date was in your particular country. So this is on Shudder. I believe it's also on Amazon Prime. It's considered a tentpole of Mario Bava's filmography. If you don't know who Mario Bava is, pretty much widely regarded as one of the most influential Italian directors of all time, especially for the horror genre and the horror subgenres and the horror down genres. And this was written by Marcello Fondato. I'm sorry to any Italian people that are watching this. I'm really sorry. The English version was done by Mary Arden, who also plays the character of Peggy. Most famous people in this movie are probably Cameron Mitchell, who plays Max or Massimo, who always seem to get locked into Italian movies. I mean, as opposed to like Supersonic Man, which, oh boy, yeah, I don't know what the fuck he was thinking with that. And also Ava Bartok, who, Jesus, even at this point, I mean, my word, what a beauty. Hungarian British actress, widely revered for her looks and also just her screen presence. She was never like the biggest actress, but she always was able to command the screen whenever you saw her. How could she not? So as far as this film, basically Italian models are getting offed by somebody that I like to call Italian Rorschach, because he really does look like Rorschach. It is actually impressive, like just how, how similar he is. If you don't know who Rorschach is, I mean, Watchmen, there you go. And there are other actresses involved in this, mostly Italian. You can also tell that the English language track, while well done, doesn't always quite match the emotions and stuff like that. That was always an issue with films like this. But yes, the inspector must figure out through the series of people that may have slight motivations or complete, justifiable motivations, who is behind this. Actually, it's pretty obvious who's behind this, and it is very, very strange how this movie actually just expediently gets its story done. Because some Bava movies can feel like they drag a little bit, but more often than not, Bava understood how to do a pretty good pace until his films maybe got a little bit too long in the tooth. I think that's how that phrase goes. And yeah, we see a woman named Isabella that gets stalked in the woods and killed. A lot of really dark shit going on with some of the women here. It's not like down to a bunch of nudity. There's a slight amount of it, but really it's just about women being put in peril. And why are they being put in peril? Well, it turns out it's just tied to one particular person. So, yeah, Isabella gets knocked off in the woods. I did note this English language track is a little bit much. And then Bava knew how to get some great shots going here. I don't really think that the idea of dragging your victims to different locations was necessarily the most expedient way, because you had cars, but you didn't want to leave any evidence. And then the inspector is kind of grilling all the remaining models, because Isabella was part of this countryside model boarding house thing where they did all their stuff and entertained guests and everything. It was a little bit strange. And there's a guy named Caesar, the designer, who is a bit creepy, and you might, as far as like the actor, as far as his look, you might have thought he would have been the killer. No, he wasn't. There also is one named Clarice. Yes, hello, Clarice. That kept wearing the same jacket as the Rorschach killer, and you might have thought might have actually been that. I think that might have actually been better, but no. And there's a thing centered around Isabella's diary that Peggy manages to find. Turns out Peggy didn't want something found in that particular thing because, well, there was something that she did involving a pregnancy she didn't want to have. And money was always being borrowed from Isabella, because apparently Isabella was a goddamn ATM back before ATMs were even fucking invented, especially in Italy. But That diary is really goddamn important. And we get some creative kills after Isabella. We get an implication of cocaine being used by certain people, especially a guy named, you know, just certain, silly people, like certain Italian people started to look the same here. The narrative was very simple, but some of the characters are kind of starting to look the same. There's a guy named Frank who basically calls Peggy. I started to wonder if it was Peggy or Nicole. Actually, I was starting to kind of get going. I thought Frank might have been the killer just based on how they were making him act. And I don't know who lit their homes like this because the blonde woman arrives and there's these weird, technicolor, things, red, blue lighting, pink, and it looks like a fucking museum or like a collector's house. Like people were just hoarding shit and whatever. And Italian Rorschach ended up killing her. And that was kind of creative, dragging her around the goddamn house. I don't understand why every Italian home looked like it was built in the 1800s. Peggy does end up showing up and basically ends up burning this diary, so it's kind of a little bit like she doesn't want something found out about that. Isabella knew about certain things that were going on. Where is the diaries? What was written down at one point? And there was this book that had like the saint symbols on there. And, oh my God, who could it actually be? Who could be doing that? Wrote down, where is the diary? This is Italian Rorschach, by the way. And everybody owed Isabella money, evidently, I guess, kinda. That's kind of the crazy thing about it. Also, yes, this, Peggy ended up getting drugged up the stairs. The police arrive in no hurry to really get in the house. And meanwhile, just getting drugged around, Peggy got basically, she said she burned the diary, then she got her face burned and died because she got slapped around a whole bunch. That was a little uncomfortable, but it was what it was. And Scalo, or again, these names are starting to get a little bit silly because mainly the English language track. I think if it was in its original Italian, it probably would have been better. But he's got a drug issue. At one point, he yells at the costume designer, Inspector, look at his face. He hates women. Boy, bold jump right there. And then he starts freaking the fuck out. And every woman that is still alive is still at this countryside house area. And everybody leaves except Greta. Greta lives nearby but doesn't want to be alone. There's an implication that two women are living together. All right, it was about time we saw that scene, which we didn't get to see. And then a dead body ends up in the trunk, Peggy. And then we just get more people being killed. It makes enough sense that there's a thread going through it, but it is still a little silly. Greta ends up dragging the body into the basement where, Rorschach basically ends up also smothering Greta. Apparently, Chris Benoit took inspiration from this. And while Max and others are held in jail, they get their effects, and then we see a shot of Max's affections, or possessions. And, that little black book with the saint symbols is there. Oh, no. Oh, no. So, then we smash cut to the fact that the Countess, Eva Bartok, was doing this because, Isabella was basically screwing a bunch of people, or trying to, screw up a bunch of people's lives, is what I'm saying. She could have been screwing a bunch of people, for all I know. It is Italy. But this was because, she wanted a bunch of money she was owed from some people, including a man named Richard. Like IOUs were going on. It was all this. And, Max and I'm sorry, if Eva Bartok's throwing herself at you, she'd be hard to resist. But, yeah, Max is basically, working in, synchronicity with her to basically off all these women so they could have a clean slate. But they must find a killer. They must find somebody so the police will get off their back. So they need a goddamn Rorschach killer. And then a woman that I lovingly called Italian Liza Minnelli because of how she looked with the eye makeup and the haircut and everything. And then Contessa basically falls off of a landing when something is conveniently loosened. And then she shows back up, and Max is like, what the hell are you doing here? I mean, he says it with his eyes. He doesn't actually say it verbally, but it turns out that he was doing this and trying to off the Countess so he could get all her stuff because they were married in secret. He loved her money, but he didn't love her. How could you not love Eva Bartok? But she's like, oh, she's got a head wound, all this kind of stuff, whatever. But she manages to get close to him, hug him, and then a gunshot goes off. And you think she shot, but oh, no. She had a gun and shot Max. And then she calls the inspector, and then hangs up the phone, passes out seemingly from the massive head trauma that she has suffered, and falling off of a second story of a building. And then the phone's hanging, and then we go, fine, we are done. I know it's Fine, work with me here. And that is Blood and Black Lace. Well shot, well directed. Bit of a weird thing with some of the characters and some of their motivations. That could be down again to the English track not being exact translation. But pretty good overall. Still holds up pretty well after 60-something years. So, agree, disagree, what I said, like, share, subscribe, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky handles in the description. I'm John Rentlin. Until we dive into the Italian horror, well again, happy trails to you.